good topic.
Right, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shivram, for
Thank
your
you.
valuable time and nice topic. Now, Dr. Harish,
Yes, sir.
shall we start that?
Yes, sir.
We'll
So, good
start
evening.
from here. Huh?
Yes,
You
yes,
you
sir.
can tell their judges also who judge. He can
Yes, sir.
he can ask the question. No, he has to ask the question.
Yes, sir. So, good evening, everybody. On behalf of Surgical Society Bangalore, so I welcome for the online monthly clinical meeting of the month May, hosted by private surgeons of Bangalore and corporate hospitals, coordinated by Dr. Chalani, sir. So now, just now, I welcome our president, Dr. Venkatachala, with a virtual medallion for this program.
Thank you, Harish.
Welcome, Dr. Venkatachala. Yes, sir. So, with your permission, we'll proceed with the e-poster presentation. I have some announcements. So, we are bound to the time. It is 3 minutes for the poster presentation and 2 minutes for the discussion. Dr. Shashidhar from Bangalore Medical College is going to judge the posters for this session. It is 45 minutes duration. Yes, sir. Over to Dr. Chalani, sir, for the e-poster presentation.
Good evening. We will, without wasting time, I will invite Dr. Vishak from BBH, a case of paraganglioma. Dr. Vishak from BBH.
Sir, here, sir.
Please start. Dr. Muralidhar is there? Judge? Harish? Because he has to ask question. No, Harish, you have to unmute. Harish, you have to unmute.
Yes.
He's there, no?
Shashidhar,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
can you unmute?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'm there.
Yeah, proceed.
Yes, sir. I'm
Yes,
here,
sir.
sir.
We'll proceed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Start.
Good evening to the Honorable President, the Secretary, my dear consultants and friends. I'm going to be presenting a poster, case report of a paraganglioma. A 32-year-old lady presented to our OPD with complaints of palpitation and chest pain, intermittent chest pain for a period of 1 year, associated with sweating, abdominal pain, and headache for the past 4 to 6 months. She was diagnosed with diabetes and hypertension since the past 4 months. For hypertension, she was on metoprolol. She gives history of migraines since childhood, but currently not on medication. Clinical picture: patient's pulse rate was 90 beats per minute, BP was 130/70, respiratory rate was 18 per minute. Systemic examination did not yield any significant findings. We did an imaging, ultrasound abdomen and pelvis, which showed a right suprarenal or paravertebral solid mass with mild calcific degeneration, measuring 6.1 into 3.8 centimeters, suggestive of paraganglioma. We went ahead with the 24-hour urinary normetanephrine, which showed elevated results, 3027.2 microgram per 24 hours, and low-dose dexamethasone stress test was done. Pre-test, the cortisol levels were 4.26. Post-test was 1.06. This is a gallium rotenok PET CT, which shows the mass here, which is in close proximity to the celiac trunk, the stomach artery, the aorta. And here, this is a posterior image, which shows the relation of the mass with the great vessels. Preoperative preparation: the patient control of hypertension. The patient was on beta blockers. Metoprolol was started 4 months prior to the surgery, and alpha blockers started 7 days prior to the surgery. Fluid hydration orally 4 liters per day from the day of admission, and vitals monitoring were done. The patient underwent a laparotomy and excision of paraganglioma, 7 into 4 centimeter dumbbell-shaped tumor, which arised from the right crest of diaphragm extending to the lesser sac. Multiple feeding vessels from the aorta, celiac trunk, and hepatic artery were noted. This is the pre-excision. You can see the mass, which was the porta is retracted. The pointer is pointing towards the mass, which is in close proximity with the hepatic vessels and the celiac trunk. This is the mass that is excised, which is approximately 7 into 4 centimeters. This is post-excision, the superior aspect and the inferior aspect. You can see it's a close relation with the vessels. Intraoperative BP management: hypertension was managed by magnesium sulfate infusion, magnesium sulfate infusion, small boluses, sodium nitroprusside infusion, and metoprolol infusion. Immediate tumor removal, the patient went into hypertension, which was managed by crystalloid boluses and non-renal infusion. These images show the pre-excision, the hypertension, the infusions going on, the trend of BP intra-op, and post-op hypertension.
Your time is up, Dr. Ishaq.
Yes, sir. Biopsy showed benign paraganglioma. Patient shifted to post-op recovery was uneventful, and post-op norepinephrine levels were normal. Thank you.
Questions from Dr. Shashidhar, sir?
So, yeah, is there any recurrence in this tumor? What is the general the pathology of this paraganglioma growth?
Huh?
Hello?
Hello, sir.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes,
What
sir.
is the prognosis of the tumor?
A good prognosis, sir.
I mean, 5-year survival rate.
It's a benign tumor, sir. The biopsy has come as a benign tumor, so he has a good prognosis.
Okay.
So is it a extra adrenal functional paraganglioma?
Yes, sir. It's an extra-adrenal functional paraganglioma, sir.
How do you
There is
follow
one
up for the
question.
recurrence?
BP measurements, vital measurements at every 6 to 12 months.
Chat is
Interval.
not coming.
Any questions?
Okay. Yeah,
So-
one follow-up. How do you follow up for recurrence?
Yeah, I already answered, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Is the patient on antihypertensives? If an antihypertensives, how long will he continue?
Sir, post-op the patient's BP was in the normal range. We did not continue with any antihypertensives. Sir.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Vishak. It's time of
The next is Dr. Adarsh from BBH. A case of ameloblastoma. Dr. Adarsh. Dr. Adarsh, can you hear us? Yeah, Bangalore Baptist.
Dr. Chalani,
Yes, sir.
at the end of their presentation, they should stop sharing so that the other person can
No,
start.
they are from the same institution. So one screen only.
So there won't be any
Same.
waste of time.
They are from the same institution. So I think they are having only one screen. They are at the same place.
What happened? They are not.
So, okay, there's a message from them that the system is stuck. Then we can say go to third place. We'll go to third case.
Somebody else can start, and if they
Pankaj,
start, they can come
Pankaj or
back.
Rahul from BBH ready?
No BBH.
BBH no. Then we can do our case.
Yes, sir. Sushmita.
Okay.
Dr. Sushmita
Sushmita.
can proceed.
Sushmita. Okay, sir.
Dr. Shashidhar, sir, please note, Dr. Sushmita is started presenting. It's the sixth
Yes,
poster.
yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Number six from
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
BMGH.
Yes, sir. Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
Start.
Good evening.
Good evening to respected President, Secretary of Surgical Society in Bangalore. All-
Chalani sir, you please switch off your
File.
speaker. Otherwise you get a lot of echo. There cannot be two speakers in the same room. So just switch off one of them, please.
Yeah. No, start.
Good evening to respected President and Secretary of Surgical Society of Bangalore, all my senior professors, teachers, and my colleagues. Myself, Dr. Shushmita, second year resident from Jain Hospital, today presenting in poster on an unusual presentation of intestinal lymphoma. We present a case of ileocolic intersusception in an adult secondary to lymphoma presenting as a small bowel obstruction. My patient is a 44-year-old presented with right lower abdomen pain associated with nausea and non-bilious vomiting since 2 days. He has history of constipation, no history of fever or weight loss. Physical examination revealed normal vital signs, and parabdomen is soft, distended, and umbilical region tenderness noted with bowel sounds hyperactive. X-ray abdomen showed features of small bowel obstruction. Lab evaluations were normal. CT abdomen was done, which showed ileocolic intersusception with a well-defined polypoidal lesion at the tip of the terminal loop, which is acting as a lead point. We have performed right hemicolectomy. Post-operative recovery was uneventful. Intraoperatively, distended bowel loops proximal to the IC junction and a 6 into 6 centimeters growth noted at the ileocolic junction, which is partially obstructing the lumen with multiple mesenteric lymph nodes. HPE revealed diffuse large B-cell lymphoma with tumor infiltration of around 3 lymph nodes out of 19 pericecal and pericolic lymph nodes. Immunophenotypic analysis showed positive for CD20, BCL6, MUM1 and negative for CD3, 5 and 10. Now the patient is being treated with rituximab chemotherapy. PET CT showed hypermetabolic bilateral inguinal lymph nodes and right side axillary lymph nodes hypermetabolic states, and the perianastomotic sites low-grade metabolically active state. Coming to discussion, intersusception in adults is a rare occurrence, accounting around 5 to 10% of all patients with intersusception. About 80 to 90% of intersusception in adults have an identifiable etiology, and the most common site is small intestine. About malignant etiology is around 25% in small bowel intersusceptions and around 48% in the colonic intersusceptions. Lymphomas usually present as dull aching abdominal pain, obstruction, bleeding, diarrhea, or as an acute, rarely as perforation. Diffuse large B-cell lymphoma is an aggressive and most common form of NHL with an extranodal involvement of around 20 to 40%. In that, most common site is stomach, around 50 to 60%, followed by stomach, around 20 to 30%.
Your time is up.
Diagnosing tools are colonoscopy and enteroscopy. To definitive diagnosis is HPE and immunophenotypic analysis. In adults, for intersusception, surgery is the mainstay of treatment, later followed by combination of monoclonal antibody and chemotherapy achieved significant results. On summarizing, lymphomas causing intersusception and presenting as acute abdomen are rare, and bowel intersusception secondary to lymphoma is rare in adults, accounting for only 4% of all cases. So, patient presenting with abdominal pain and vomiting, we have to rule out intersusception also as differential diagnosis. These are my references. Thank you.
Time is over. Time over. Shashida.
Hello.
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
Hello. Yeah. What is the difference between primary intestinal lymphoma and secondary intestinal lymphoma?
Primary is in lymphoma arising from the GI tract, sir. Secondary
No.
from the generalized lymphadenopathy metastasis, sir.
Do you know about anything about Dawson's criteria?
Dawson's criteria, sir.
Yeah. To call it as a primary intestinal lymphoma.
No, sir.
Okay. With the PET CT was done before surgery or after surgery?
After surgery we did, sir. We took
Because there is,
emergencies.
yeah, that surgery that's showing the linguinal lymph nodes. That's why I asked. It's a primary or secondary intestinal lymphoma.
After surgery we did PET CT, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Sushmita. We'll proceed to the next paper.
Yeah, Dr. Harish.
Yes, sir.
Baptist is ready now. We can go to
Yes, sir.
Baptist.
Yes,
The second,
welcome, Dr. Adarsh.
Adarsh. Case of ameloblastoma. Dr. Adarsh from Baptist.
Adarsh, please proceed.
Are you able to hear us, sir?
Yeah, now
Yeah,
start.
please proceed.
Start.
Yes, sir. Good evening, everyone. Good evening to Honorable President, Secretary, Senior Consultants, colleagues, and my fellow colleagues. I'm here to present a rare case of giant ameloblastoma. Ameloblastoma is a true neoplasm of the enamel origin. Most common site of origin is molar ramus of the region of mandible and grows in buccolingual direction. Most commonly seen in 3rd to 4th decade of life, and treatment of choice is surgical excision with margin of 1.5 centimeters. According to review of literature, largest documented ameloblastoma was 16 centimeters till now. Here I'm presenting a case of giant ameloblastoma, which is 25 to 30 centimeters clinically. A 38-year-old patient, old male, presented with complaints of swelling in the lower jaw from past 10 years, which was initially small, gradually progressed to present size. Mouth opening was fair. The patient was able to move his tongue, and he was able to consume, able to tolerate soft diet. On examination, there was a huge lesion of size 25 to 30 centimeters, originating which was and of variable consistency, extending from the bilateral ramus, from bilateral angle of the mandible, and the floor of mouth along with the lower gingivobuccal sulcus was extensively stretched, and there was multiple loss of teeth in the lower jaw. On further evaluation with a CT scan, it's showing the 3D reconstruction of a CT scan is showing a huge expansile lesion of the lesion, which is multilocular cystic lesion present in the ramus of the mandible, with the displaced muscles at the floor of the mouth. After preoperative evaluation, patient was taken up for wide local excision with fibula free flap reconstruction and tracheostomy. Due to the sheer size of the tumor, awake fiber optic nasal intubation was done under airway block, and due to the size of the tumor, getting the surrounding dissection around the tumor was difficult, and because of the altered anatomy also. This is the composite defect after complete excision of the tumor in toto, which is showing the floor of the mouth with stretched muscles and tongue. On the right side, we have free fibula osteocutaneous flap taken from the left lower limb, which was refashioned into with multiple osteotomies to the to refashion into mandible and fixed with titanium plates and screws. Vascular anastomosis of peroneal artery with facial artery was done, and two tributaries of the internal jugular vein was anastomosed. The mandible was fixed to the ramus of the flap, free fibula flap was fixed to the ramus of the mandible with the titanium screws, and plantaris tendon was used as a static sling for maintaining of the oral competence. This is the immediate post-operative picture. Gross specimen was approximately gross specimen was 5.4 kg in weight, and the cut section was showing multiple cystic lesions with brown colored fluid. Post-operative recovery was uneventful. Patient was discharged on post-operative 13. On summary, this is the largest ameloblastoma excised. Surgical resection is the treatment of choice.
Time is over.
Surgical challenges are intraoperative and post-operative airway management.
Thank you, Dr.
sir.
Adarsh.
These are my references. Thank you, sir.
Is there a role for adjuvant therapy for this patient?
No, sir.
How will you follow up, Adarsh?
Sir, follow-up, the ameloblastoma is known to metastasize to the lung, sir. On a yearly basis, we'll check for lung metastasis.
CT scan or PET CT?
CT scan, sir.
Okay.
How many hours took the surgery?
8
How
hours,
many
sir,
hours?
including 8 hours, sir.
Okay. How many days patient stayed in ICU?
3 days, sir.
3 days. Okay. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Adarsh.
Thank you, sir.
Next is case report of chondroma. I think there was some change in the name of the presenter. No, it is not Pankaj or Rahul. Rahul, I think.
Rahul, sir. Rahul, sir.
Okay, Rahul. Present this thing. Rare case of chondroma.
Dr. Shashidhar, please make a note that it is Dr. Rahul. Yes, report of
Yes, sir. Yes,
chondroma.
sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Good evening, everyone. I'll be presenting a rare case of a large sacrococcygeal chordoma that was excised at our institution. This was a 40-year-old gentleman who presented with a large lower back swelling, which was gradually increasing in size over 6 years, with a rapid increase over the past 3 months associated with worsening constipation. There were no neurological deficits or bladder symptoms. The only positive history was that he had had surgery for a sacral tumor and an anorectal malformation at birth 40 years ago. On examination, there was a large, non-tender, hard 20 by 20 centimeter growth, obliterating the gluteal cleft. PR showed deficient anal tone, and there was extramucosal indentation of the rectum and the anal canal posteriorly by the tumor. CT with correlative MRI showed a large lytic lobulated lesion extending up to S2, anteriorly abutting the rectum with loss of fat planes, posteriorly the subcutaneous space, and laterally both bilateral gluteal muscles were involved. As you can see from the CT films, there was lytic destruction of the sacrum and the coccyx. CT-guided biopsy showed that this was a chordoma. The procedure performed was an en-bloc sacrectomy with VRAM flap reconstruction, APR, and a sigmoid colostomy. So first the patient was in lithotomy, bilateral DJ stenting was done. Then the flap with the pedicle was harvested and placed in the pelvis. Abdominal dissection was completed where the rectum and the anal canal were separated from the bladder and the seminal vesicles, and the skin incision was closed. This is the tumor. The patient was then placed in the jackknife position where a longitudinal elliptical incision was made, muscles and ligaments were cut, and the pelvis was entered posteriorly. The spine was divided at the S1-2 junction, and an en-bloc resection of the sacral chordoma was done, and the APR was completed. The VRAM flap was closed in layers. Patient was then put in supine position, the sigmoid colostomy was performed, and the laparotomy and the donor sites were closed. This is the histological appearance of the tumor. The patient's present condition is good. He is tolerating normal diet, ambulating well, and his wound has healed well, and the stoma is healthy. He's planned for post-operative radiotherapy. Chordomas are rare, slow-growing malignant neoplasms arising from the notochord. The sacrum is the most common site of occurrence. The annual incidence is about 1 in 10 lakh cases. There are 3 variants, of which the classical variant was the type that our patient had. The treatment of choice is surgical resection, which is en-bloc resection with wide margins. This is the standard of care, although there may be significant mobility and reduction in ambulation. Post-op radiotherapy is useful in addressing microscopic disease, and a combination of both helps increase survival. In summary, these are rare bone cancers arising from the notochord.
Your audio is gone. Rahul?
The machine has hung up, I think, Chalani.
Yeah.
Machine has hung up. Yeah.
Yes,
They have a problem with their machine. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Just we'll wait for 30 seconds, sir. Then we'll proceed to the next, sir.
Yeah.
Is it okay?
Yeah. That would be the correct thing. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Harish, look at the chat box also, no?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I'm looking.
We are
yes.
seeing
But,
post
yes, sir.
fibula flap and any dental rehabilitation done.
but he's not able to answer now, sir, because
They're not connected, so they can't answer.
Yes,
so what we can do is
question.
request them to answer on the chat box.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Maybe with a private phone call to that group.
Yes, sir.
Hello, sir. This is Dr. Rahul.
Yeah.
Yeah. You are okay now?
Yes, I'm sorry. Our internet connection got disconnected.
Okay.
Okay, Rahul.
Can you carry on? Carry on
I
now.
don't know which
Only
slide.
No need. You already come to summary. Now I think we'll ask Shashidhar to ask the question.
Sure, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Is there any neurological deficit before surgery to the patient? Does he have any neurological?
the patient did
Neurological
not have
deficit.
none, sir. None, sir. The patient had no neurological deficit.
Post-operatively?
Post-operatively, sir, there was some bladder incontinence for which he needed a Foley. We are hopeful
Okay.
that within the next 6 months, that will improve.
Okay.
There's a question on the
There are
chat
two
box.
questions here.
What is the indication for APR?
So, sir, in this patient, the MRI showed that there was a loss of fat planes with the rectum anteriorly. So, in order to get good margin, we had to perform an APR.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Rahul. Meanwhile, I wanted to ask
Thank you,
whether
sir.
the system is ready to proceed with the next presenter, or shall
Yeah,
we
can
move
we,
on to
your system is ready?
Prince
We will go next one.
Yes, sir. The system is ready, sir.
Okay. The next one, choledochal cyst. Babu Sri Vasava. Share the screen.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Start.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, dear respected judges. I'll be presenting on choledochal cyst, our experience. So, choledochal cyst is a congenital cystic dilatation of extrahepatic and/or intrahepatic biliary tree, which is 3 to 4 times more common in females compared to males, and usually diagnosed in infancy or childhood. But around 50% are diagnosed in adulthood. Incidence is around 1 in 1 lakh to 1 in 1.5 lakh in Western population, whereas in Asians, it is around 1 in 1,000, and 2/3 of them are from Japan. Etiology being more than 90% of the cases, the etiology is long common channel. That is the joining of the pancreatic duct to the common bile duct is more than 1.5 centimeter from the wall of the duodenum. And the other reasons could be increased pressure secondary to partial biliary obstruction. It is classified according to Todani. There are 5 classifications, and treatment is based on the classification. If it is intrahepatic tree is involved, then dissection of the segment should be done. Presentation in 20% of the patients, it is jaundice, abdominal pain, and right upper quadrant mass. But in adults, many patients may present with cholangitis. The investigations are ultrasound, CT, but for better anatomical understanding, MRCP, ERCP, and transhepatic cholangiogram is done. Complications being cystolithiasis, cholangitis, acute pancreatitis, hepaticolithiasis, cholangiocarcinoma, secondary biliary cirrhosis, and spontaneous rupture of cyst. We had 4 cases where all 4 of them were female, 2 above age group of 50, and 1 was a girl of 7-year-old, and 1 was an adolescent, 28, where everyone presented with complaints of upper abdominal pain, and 1 patient had recurrent history of cholangitis, and she presented with fever also. In the investigation, one of the patient had all liver parameters to be normal, whereas other 3 had raised ALPs. In the USGs, it showed polypoidal mass with fusiform dilatation 1, and with distended gallbladder with no calculi and stent within in the other, and other patient had choledochal lithiasis with calculi within. The final diagnosis of choledochal cyst was known through MRCP, where 3 patients had type 1 choledochal cyst, and 1 presented with choledochal cyst 4A. All of them went cholecystectomy, Roux-en-Y hepaticojejunostomy, and 1 was laparoscopically done. Biopsy confirmed the diagnosis of choledochal cyst. In 1 of the patients where gallbladder thickening was there, that patient had adenocarcinoma.
The time is over. 3 minutes over.
Yes, sir. These are just the pictures.
Just
sir.
summary,
Yes, sir. Summary is upper abdominal pain was a common presentation. Commonest type is type 1, and laparoscopy procedure may be attempted in selected patients, and should be cautious about the malignancy in older age. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Dr. Shasidhar, please.
In which case, what laparoscopy surgery you did for this case? One of the
Sir,
case.
Laparoscopy is mainly done in patients who do not have cholangitis and in whom suspicion of malignancy will be ruled out. In this patient was she even presented with normal LFT, and the MRCP showed only choledochal cyst, that to type 1, with no history of fever, and even all lab parameters were within normal, and no comorbidities was also not there, sir. And we had expertise also, so we went with option of laparoscopy.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Babu.
Thank you. Thank you. Next presenter, quickly. Dr. Ninu. IPEC, our experience.
Good evening, sir. All the respected judges. I'll be talking about HIPEC. HIPEC is hyperthermic intraperitoneal chemotherapy. It is a loco-regional chemotherapy. It is done after achieving optimal cytoreductive surgery. The most common indications include ovarian malignancy and primary seromyxoma peritoneae. The contraindications depend on the extent of the disease, and not able to achieve a optimum cytoreductive surgery is also a contraindication. The rationale is we primarily depend on the effects of hyperthermia and the advantage of giving it intraperitoneally. Then there are two types, open and closed. The procedure is the chemotherapy solution is forced through a roller pump, a flow rate of around 1 liter per minute, and the temperature we try to achieve is 41 to 43 degrees Celsius intraperitoneally, after which the entire fluid is drained out and we give a thorough peritoneal wash. The intraoperatively, we should monitor the, since it is a hyperdynamic vasodilatory circulatory state, the vitals should be monitored, thermoregulation is important, and electrolyte balance. Some of the complications are mentioned there, the most common being anastomotic leak, and systemic complications include pulmonary embolism, atelectasis, renal failure, etc. HIPEC, our experience, it was a 52-year-old female. The uniqueness being she was an HIV positive patient. She presented with abdominal pain and USG showed features of peritoneal carcinomatosis. We did a CT which showed features of seromyxoma peritoneae. We did an ultrasound guided omental biopsy which showed low-grade mucinous neoplasm. We planned for CRS with HIPEC after necessary preoperative workup. Intraoperatively, these are the findings. There were mucinous deposits all around in the greater omentum, in the lesser sac, in the subdiaphragmatic surface and pelvis. There was bulky uterus with bilateral ovaries studded with mucinous deposit, and appendix showed growth with mucinous jelly. We did total abdominal hysterectomy with omentectomy and right hemicolectomy with peritonectomy. In HIPEC, we used oxaliplatin 330 mg, which was circulated at a temperature of 42 degrees Celsius over 90 minutes. After HIPEC, we did an ileocolic anastomosis. Intraoperatively, there were blood loss, multiple transfusion had to be done. Postoperatively, the complications we encountered are deranged INR, hypokalemia, acidosis, which were all corrected, and she was discharged on postoperative 16. The summary being, HIPEC is the maximum, the advantage is there will be maximum tumor drug interaction, minimum systemic toxicity, and the median survival time can be improved when compared with the systemic chemotherapy alone by around 16 to 24 months. The 5-year survival rate by 30 to 45%. And here we did it on a HIV positive individual, which is reported minimally. Only one literature was available so far. But we do not prefer HIPEC in HIV with those having AIDS-defined criteria.
Thank you. Dr. Asida, please.
What are the post-operative complications after HIPEC you can expect in the patients?
Most commonly, anastomotic leak. Then we should adhesions are an important.
No, immediate post-operative.
Immediately, the electrolyte imbalance, INR derangement, and all the acidosis.
Okay. What is optimal cytoreduction surgery?
Optimal before the surgery, we do the peritoneal carcinoma index. Optimal cytoreduction means the tumor deposit left behind. If it is 0 means no tumor nodule. If it is 1, the size will be less than 2.5 millimeter.
If it is 2, it will be more than 2.5 millimeter. So in CC 0 or 1 only, we go ahead with CRS with HIPEC.
What was the CD4, CD8 count of this patient? Was the patient otherwise immunologically okay?
CD4 percentage was 23.52 percentage.
It was okay.
It was okay.
So what was the peritoneal carcinomatosis index in this patient before surgery
18.
or at the time of surgery?
18.
So does this patient have a high likelihood of recurrence?
Yes.
After what index do you think that the patient's risk will be more?
More than 20, it is more.
No, your patient had 18.
Yeah.
So what is the maximum score that you can get?
Maximum score is 39.
Yeah. So what is the duration of follow-up now for this patient?
Since 6 months, every 3 months, we are following up with tumor markers.
So not just tumor markers. What tumor markers would you like to use? What was elevated preoperatively?
CEA.
CEA. So CEA, and what else would you like to use?
In her case, we should follow up the CD4 count also.
No. Can CA 125 also be added because peritoneal problem, right?
Yes, sir.
Was CA 125 done earlier before?
Done earlier.
Is oxaliplatin the correct chemotherapy choice?
In appendiceal cancer, we can use oxaliplatin, sir.
Because the current thing, the papers shared now say that mitomycin C would be a better option than using oxaliplatin as a regimen. Okay, very good presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Time over. Time over. Next, we'll be going to Philomena. Please. Philomena Hospital.
Yes, sir.
Sir,
Ready? Stop sharing. One second.
Please share your screen. A rare case of omental infarction, Dr. Sriram.
Yes, sir. So can I start?
Yeah, please.
Good evening, one and all. I'm Dr. Sriram here to present a rare case of omental infarction. Our patient is a 45-year-old female who presented with abdominal pain of 2 days duration, predominantly in the right upper quadrant and epigastrium, associated with 2 episodes of non-bilious vomiting. Relevant past history is she had history of ileocecal tuberculosis, for which she was treated with ATT 6 years ago, and recently 4 months ago she underwent LAVH. She is also a diabetic. On examination, all vitals were normal, and she was obese with BMI of 33 kg per meter square. Per abdominal examination, there was tenderness in the right hypochondrium, epigastrium, and the right iliac fossa, and there was no rebound tenderness, no guarding or rigidity. With a working diagnosis of acute cholecystitis, appendicitis, and recurrent abdominal tuberculosis, patient was further examined. Total count was elevated, CRP was elevated, ESR was normal, or other investigations were normal. USG abdominal pelvis was done, which was also normal. CECT abdominal pelvis further done showed focal areas of increased density in the right lumbar region with fat standing in the omentum anterior to the transverse colon. So a diagnosis of omental infarction was considered, further workup was done, thrombophilia was ruled out. Patient was managed initially conservatively with IV fluids, IV antibiotics, and analgesics. After 24 to 48 hours of conservative management, patient still had symptoms, so diagnostic laparoscopy was done. Intraoperatively, the omentum was found to be adherent to the anterior abdominal wall to the previous laparoscopic scar, and it was twisted off its own axis. And the right part of the right side of the omentum was found to have necrotic and ischemic areas. Laparoscopic partial omentectomy was done. HPE confirmed that patient had it was omental necrosis. Patient was discharged on POD2. So our patient is a case of omental infarction secondary to omental torsion, predisposing factors being recent abdominal surgery, and also contributing factors being obesity and diabetes. So omental infarction is classified into idiopathic and primary idiopathic omental infarction and secondary omental infarctions. Secondary causes can be torsion, hypercoagulatory, polycythemia, omental tumors, or adhesions. There can also be a intra-abdominal pathological process which provides distal anchorage, like in our case, which is a previous surgery. So the importance of this study is importance of presenting this poster is a rare cause of abdominal pain, and it is a great mimicker. And this is a recent article which is published in 2020, which shows that 70% of the patients were managed conservatively with a failure rate of 15%, and 30% cases were initially offered surgery as first line of treatment. The mean hospital stay was 5.1 days for conservative group, and surgical groups were discharged earlier. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Sriram.
Yes, sir.
Questions by Dr. Sridhar?
How common to get a primary diagnosis of omental infarction?
Sir, primary omental infarction is relatively rare, sir. Most common cause of omental infarction is torsion, sir.
No, in your case, you are told preoperative only, like before surgery, it was diagnosed as primary omental infarction.
90% of the cases are diagnosed intraoperatively only, sir. Only 2% of the cases are diagnosed by CT. But of late, due to more CT and increased specificity, we are getting more diagnosis, sir. So this also should be kept as a differential diagnosis while examining a right-sided abdominal pain when patient is not very toxic, sir.
Okay. Whether that was an hernia or it is just infection?
No, sir,
because the momentum was adherent to the anterior abdominal wall, previous surgical scar.
Yes, sir. There was no hernia, sir. Only, at the surgical site, it was adherent, sir. There was no hernia noted intraoperatively, and all appendix and gallbladder, everything was normal, sir.
Okay.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
See, chat box, you can put it. Okay. You can put the question on the chat box, sir.
Please unmute yourself, Ashok.
Yeah. You have said the most common omental infarction. You have given a few lists. I would say the most common cause of omental infarction is in a case of hernia where it gets strangulated. What do you say for that? We see quite often these things.
Yes, sir. It is due to the.
You are not mentioned at all.
Sir, omental torsion secondary to.
It is not called as torsion. It is not called as torsion. It is strangulation.
Yes, sir. The strangulation of the blood supply happens, sir. The omentum is twist upon its own axis, sir. And the causes can be distal anchorage like hernial sites or I have mentioned, sir.
All right. This is just a point I wanted to make.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Question in the chat box. Is it common to have primary omental torsion in treated cases of abdominal TB?
Sir, I'm not aware, sir. I'll just find out, sir.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can we have the answer, sir? Gurushantappa, sir?
Yeah, because this case, the patient was treated earlier for abdominal tuberculosis.
Yes.
So where we expect a momentum to be like not like a normal patient, where it can be shrunken or it can be like a small momentum.
Yeah.
So if at all there are adhesions, it is maybe more of strangulation than torsion. That's what I thought so.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Next, flexor tendon reconstruction by Dr. Samir.
Yes, sir. 1 second. Just a second, sir.
Good evening, sir. Am I audible, sir?
Yeah, little loud.
Good evening. This is Dr. Samir from St. Philomena's Hospital. I respect the President and Secretary of Surgical Society Bangalore and the consultants and the judges. So my topic on the poster presentation is the flexor tendon reconstruction.
Little close. You will come to close to mic.
So is it okay, sir?
Yeah, a little better.
So first, I wanted to go regarding the history of the flexor tendon reconstruction. Earlier, the Gallen has proposed that not to reconstruct the tendons in the zone 2 injuries because most of the time they'll have the fibrosis contracture. So probably for around 200 years, repairing of the tendon was not practiced. Then as the advent of the anatomy and the surgical suture techniques, we started to repair the zone 2 injuries also. Mainly I'm concentrating over the FDS and FTP tendon reconstruction. So just to have a anatomy, the FDS and FTP arises from the common flexor origin from the ulnar medial epicondyle. So it gets inserted over, the FDS gets inserted over the medial phalanx and the FTP get inserted over the distal phalanx. So these tendons are kept in position with the help of the pulleys. In the digits, we have got the 5 pulleys, that is annular pulleys and 3 cruciate pulleys. The zone 2 is considered as the no man's land. This was proposed by Dr. Bernal because whatever the tendon reconstruction used to do, it used to cause the flexor contraction in these zones. So the types of flexor tendon reconstruction can be classified into primary and delayed primary and secondary repair. Primary are the one which are done on the day 1 of the trauma, whereas the delayed primary are the one which are done within 1 month of the injury. Ideally, it is 2 to 3 weeks. Here I'm presenting regarding the secondary reconstruction, which can be done under 2 stages. Ideally, first you have to do the pulley reconstruction, followed by the tendon reconstruction. So this a patient who presents with a secondary repair can be done under 2 stages or in a single stage. So these are the cases which have been performed in St. Philomena's Hospital. So first, 14-year-old male presented with a history of left little finger knife cut injury. He presented after 6 weeks of injury. So on re-exploration, we have seen that there is a tendon injury of involving both FDS and FTP of the left fifth finger. So we have repaired the tendon using a palmaris longus tendon, and you can see in the lower figure that there is a bowstring effect because the pulley is not reconstructed. So if the pulley is not reconstructed, it will have a bowstring effect. So we repaired the pulley using another slip of the FDS. So now you can see that the sliding effect. So this is the reconstructed pulley, and then actually these were the videos. So with the post-op rehabilitation, he's able to flex his left little finger. So another case of delayed reconstruction. This is done in a 2-stage reconstruction, wherein which he is unable to flex all the right ulnar 3 digits.
Dr. Shamir, your time is over now, 3 minutes.
Yes, sir. So this has been repaired.
Summary.
Yes, sir. This has been repaired under 2 constructions. So one under with the pulley reconstruction was done, a plantaris tendon was taken and then reconstructed. So after this post-op rehabilitation, he was able to flex all the 3 fingers, sir.
Yeah, please summarize, Samir.
So tendon reconstruction, the take-home message is that the primary repair is the best repair. Even the patient presenting after 1 month of injury, definitely we can repair those tendons, either in a single stage or a 2-stage reconstruction, sir. So earlier, zone 2 was called as a no man's injury, but now it is no more called as a no man's zone, since we have got advanced surgical techniques available. Thank you, sir.
What other things could have been used to reconstruct these tendons?
Sir, we can use palmaris longus tendon or plantaris and facial lata tendon.
Okay.
Sir, actually, these are the 3 videos.
No, you answer, concentrate on the questions now.
How many months of rehabilitation required to get a full strength of the fingers?
Sir, at least minimum of 6 months of rehabilitation is required, sir.
6 months.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And rehabilitation should be started early, sir, within 3 weeks after the surgery, sir. And it should be passive flexion and active extension, sir. We can follow Kleenot's or Durham's protocol, sir.
Okay. We'll move on to next paper, sir.
There are some questions on chat box. Please check that.
What is the type of tendon repair done? What type of tendon repair?
Sir, this was tendon reconstruction using a plantaris tendon, and it was repaired using a modified Kessler's method, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. In the last post presentation, a case of pseudopapillary tumor by Dr. Anjali, head of pancreas. Yeah, start.
Am I audible, sir?
Yeah.
Good evening, Modern Surgical Society of Bangalore. My interesting case is pseudopapillary tumor of pancreas. 26 years female presented with a severe colicky intermittent upper abdominal pain associated with multiple episodes of non-bilious, non-projectile vomiting for past two months. History of loss of weight around 5 to 6 kg in the past 2 months. No altered bowel habits, no cough, no breathing difficulty or headache, no other comorbidities, no significant pulmonary history. Physical examination, vitals are stable, per abdomen also nothing abnormal. All other systems are normal. Investigation were done. Ultrasound is no significant abnormality seen. Investigation CACT abdominal pelvis done. A well-defined heterogeneous soft tissue density lesion with a significant enhancement measuring 6 into 8 into 6 in retroperitoneal region with a necrosis and mild ascites. It was anterior to the aorta and posterior to the mesenteric vessel, inferior to the uncinate process and third part of duodenum. So according to differential diagnosis is like duodenal cyst and retroperitoneal lymphoma or sarcoma or pseudopapillary neoplasm of pancreas. Further, we did CA99 showed normal. For the endoscopy done, there is no gastric ulcers, but there is extensive compression of the third part of the duodenum. And for the ultrasound guided biopsy done, but result is necrotic tissue that is not contributing to our diagnosis. So further we did PET-CT, which is suggestive of relatively well-defined non-FTG avid hypertension lesion, not at inferior to the uncinate process of pancreas in the portocavity region, with the anterior displacement of the portal vein, doubles the second part of duodenum laterally, and the similar non-FTG avid hypertension lesion noted in the aorta cavity region of medial to the above mentioned lesion. So we counsel the family and patient, so plan for laparotomy and excision of the tumor. These are the operative findings. Here, retroperitoneal tumor identified, meticulously dissected and isolated the tumor. The tumor was arising from the head of the pancreas and uncinate process of the pancreas. It is not connection with the pancreatic duct, and it is close proximity to the SMV. And enlarged lymph node present in the mesocolon, small bowel, mesentery, aorta cavity region along the SMV and middle colic vessel. And we remove the tumor in toto, organ reserve. We sent for histopathology. Histopathology report showed pseudopapillary neoplasm of pancreas. IHC markers are confirmed with the diagnosis of pseudopapillary neoplasm. Patient recovered well. There was no postoperative complication. On third day, patient started orally, tolerating well, no vomiting. She was discharged on postoperative fifth day. Regarding SPN, it is an exocrine tumor of the pancreas with a low potential for malignancy. 1 to 2% of all exocrine tumors, almost exclusively observed in adults and girls and women. Majority in the head and tail of the pancreas. Etiology is not unknown. It is presented as a non-specific symptom, upper abdomen pain and abdominal comfort, fullness and vomiting. May transform to malignant and metastasis to the lymph node and other organ tissue. Treatment of the tumor is surgical excision.
Your time is over, Anjali.
Thank you.
Dr. Shashidhar, please.
What was the role of doing PET-CT in this patient?
Biopsy, ultrasound biopsy shows only necrotic tissue that is not contributed to our diagnosis. So we did CACT abdomen, showed there is a following differential diagnosis: pseudopapillary neoplasm of pancreas, duodenal cyst, and all. To rule out all those things, sir, we did for the PET-CT to rule out malignancy.
You didn't consider IPMN as a differential diagnosis before pseudopapillary tumor?
Sir?
IPMN is more common than pseudopapillary tumor. No, your presentation, there was no point towards any IPMN as a differential diagnosis.
No, it is IPMN is not involving the duct, sir. This tumor is not involving the duct, sir.
Okay, that was the post-operative finding, I guess. Okay.
Do they require any adjuvant treatment? Was there any option of doing Whipples?
No, sir.
Dr. Anjali.
Usually in adenocarcinoma of pancreas, usually we'll do the Whipples. This female is young age group with this pancreatic mass and the specific CT features. It shows this one is pseudopapillary neoplasm, sir. So this is old tumor, sir. This is not cystic. So we'll go for surgeries.
Okay.
One question in chat box: any option of doing Whipples?
Yes, sir. That's what she mentioned.
Okay. Thank you. Any other question? Then we'll
go on to papers.
Yeah, that's all. Finished poster presentation?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, all the presenters. I will repeat again to all the presenters, please address to President and Secretary of Surgical Society of Bangalore. Always address them and just say good evening to all. That will be better. And thank you very much, Dr. Venkat Challa and Dr. Harish and Surgical Society of Bangalore, giving the opportunity to private surgeons and corporate hospitals to host this meeting. And I was one of the coordinator. Thank you very much for them. And I think today we are doing very good this thing, and we have already crossed much more than 100 already till poster presentation. We have already crossed because 100 people are logged in, and there are many logged in with one ID. So without wasting time, I think we'll go ahead with papers. Any other thing, Dr. Harish and Dr. Venkat?
Yes, sir. The time for the paper is 8 minutes for the presentation and 2 minutes for the discussion. We'll stick on to the time, sir.
Yeah. I already told them anyway.